Well, how's it going?
Good.
Great to be here in BC, and set that down. I'm going to talk today a little bit about my life, something that my brother would probably remember from 20-something years ago. But mainly I'm going to talk about the story of the prodigal son in the Bible. The prodigal son is what it's often been called, but really it's a story about two sons. You ever notice if you read the story, it says there was a man, he had two sons. That's great. So it's not just about the prodigal, although it's been called that over the years. So I'm going to talk about that story a lot, but I'm also, because I'm just kind of Old Testament geek, I'm always, in the Old Testament. I think this story kind of reflects a story from the Old Testament as well. A story about some sons, a guy who had two sons, and there was a bit of a squabble over the inheritance there too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the story of Jacob and Esau, if you've heard of that one before. So first of all, we got the prodigal son in Luke 15. And so you have the prodigal, as he's been called, the father, and the elder brother. So one of the key people in the stories is the father too. So I'm going to talk about that too. So in the Old Testament story, from the book of Genesis, we got Jacob. Jacob is the son who kind of wants his inheritance, or wants to take his older brother's inheritance. And the father is Isaac, and Esau is the elder brother. So I'm going to talk about all these guys. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about me back in 1992. I'm not sure if you can say 92 and people know what it means anymore. Not 92. It means 1992 for all you guys. But anyway, back in 92, I had a little prodigal experience myself. And the father, being my dad, who I saw in that Sick Moose video. So you might have met him before. I'm not sure. So I'm going to talk about that. So first of all, I'll talk about Luke. And what happens in Luke. The prodigal son. The kid says to his dad, "You only live once, Dad. Give me my money. I want my share of the inheritance, and I want it now." And how many dads here would say, "Okay, sure, just give that to your kid"? Well, I don't know, but hey, crazy enough, this is what God does. I mean, God. You say God? Well, the father in this story is kind of like God, right? In the parable of the prodigal son. And so that's exactly what he does. Does that sound like God to you? Is God like that in your life? Is he extremely generous and gracious? Well, depending on what you think of that, it might depend on which of the two sons you relate to in that story. But we'll see. In the Old Testament story, Jacob is one of my favorite Old Testament stories. This wily guy named Jacob, whose name pretty much means he's like a deceiver. He grasps at the heel. He's kind of a cheater, Jacob. And of course, he becomes the main ancestor of Israel because his name gets changed to Israel. But anyway, he's quite the guy. If you know the story, he dresses up like his hairy older brother, Esau. His dad is kind of almost on his deathbed. And in order to go in and trick and try and get the inheritance, or the birthright, he puts like hair on him and everything, and comes in and dresses up. Pretty elaborate ruse to trick his dad. And me, I have a hairy older brother as well, so you know him. Bob. And back in the summer of '91, I had a little conflict with my dad too. I met this friend who wanted to go traveling. I had finished 1 year of college, and I was like, I'm just going to go traveling. So I came home that summer and I told Mom and Dad, I'm going to go traveling next year. And so I was working at the mill. I wanted to make some money and save to go travel. And my dad says, well, then you're going to have to pay rent. What? I was mad because Bob didn't have to pay rent the summer before, or whenever, I can't remember when it was. And why didn't he have to pay rent? Why do I have to pay rent? And he's like, well, Bob, we saved to go to college. This is ridiculous. I should get free rent too. So I demanded free rent of my father as well. Kind of an inappropriate, self-centered request. So this is how I relate a little bit to the story, but we'll see. The father in Luke 15, like I said, he kind of represents God. And he doesn't stop the son from taking advantage of him, which is kind of crazy. It seems like bad parenting in one way. Oh, really? Yeah, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not, but he doesn't stop the prodigal from taking advantage of him. He gives him his inheritance and lets him go. Kind of crazy. Isaac is another story. Isaac is Jacob's dad in the Old Testament story. Isaac actually had set out only to bless Esau. You ever thought about that before? He's only going to bless Esau. In other Old Testament stories, you find that fathers bless all their children. But he's only going to bless Esau. And not only that, Esau's older, but by how long? A couple minutes, maybe? I don't know. Did you know that they're twins? So they're twins. Jacob and Esau are twins, and he's only going to bless Esau. Well, so it's a different father figure than you get in the parable. But it's kind of interesting. So Jacob, of course, dresses up and gets all hairy and wins the inheritance through deceit. My father, after I got Mommy on my side, Mom has always been the soft one in our family, so they're baby boys. And so I complained to Mom about it. I can't remember the details, but eventually Dad gave in and gave me some free rent. I was such a little jerk. But that's what happened in my life. So I saved all my money to go traveling, didn't pay a cent for all the food and everything that I was picking out on at home. So back to the parable. In the parable, the prodigal spends all his money and goes and dies, right? It says a few days later, the younger son gathered all he had, went to his country, squandered all his property in dissolute living. That's a great word, dissolute living. While he was partying it away somehow. And when he spent everything, there was a famine, and he went around and he ends up feeding pigs. Now, I've never fed pigs. Maybe some people have fed pigs here. And I'm not sure if it's a fun job or not. Pigs kind of look stinky and muddy to me. But even worse for a Jewish boy, pigs are unclean. You can't eat pigs, and this is like a low-life job. So he goes from having all this money and all this fun, and then he ends up, he's so desperate, he's feeding pigs. In the Old Testament story with Jacob takes off, and he ends up, he cuts all ties with his family and runs away because he's afraid Esau, his older brother, is going to kill him over this, and his dad's mad about it too. So he's on the run, and he ends up sleeping with a rock for a pillow. I remember as a kid, I'm like, oh, that's really uncomfortable. Well, so it's a bit of a low point for Jacob. He's on the run. Things aren't working out that great for him either. In my story, I went backpacking with a friend, and I spent like a year in Australia, backpacked a little bit in Southeast Asia, and this was how I blew all my money too, okay? I ran out of money fairly quickly. I worked a few two-bit jobs in Australia, and on my way home, I was in Malaysia, and I was pretty much out of money. I was on a shoestring budget, but I was having fun, doing some surfing, and working on nothing but my tan, and chasing women, that kind of thing. But anyway. But I hit a low point too, and my brother will remember this story. When I went to Penang, in Penang I met this really friendly guy, this Malaysian guy. I met him in some mall, and he said, "Oh, come over, I'll give you dinner." Naive little Paul, so I thought, okay, great, I'll just come with you. And I went to his house, and when I was there, he starts telling me he was a blackjack dealer, and that in the casinos, he's telling me about all the signals they did to kind of cheat. He'd let the guy know what card you're going to get. And he said, "Hey, you want me to show you?" I'm like, "Okay, sure." And I thought that'd be fun. And so he was showing me how they cheat with cards and all this. And he says, "Well, I'm going to set up a card game tonight. Will you play for me? You don't have to use your money. You can use my money." Stupid thing to do. But I'm like, okay, that sounds like fun. So I stayed. And so some guy comes over with all this money, and they set up this game, and I'm playing this game. And at one point, I'm up $10,000. I'm like blown away with this one guy who came over, had a briefcase full of money, and I was like, well, this is kind of fun. And then at one point, of course, in order to keep playing, I needed more money. And the guy promised me I didn't need any money. And so they said, well, to keep playing, you gotta pay more money. And all I had on me was my passport and my credit card, which was really not my credit card. It was my dad's kind of co-signed the credit card, you know. I was told I had a $500 limit, and I knew I was like pretty much maxed. I had like nothing left on it. But this guy who brought me over to his house pulled out my wallet with my passport and took it and my credit card and said, "You need to go and get some money or some diamonds or something so we can finish this game, or these guys will be mad and they might kill us." So I was pretty freaked out. So they drove me to some diamond store, and I told them, look, the credit card's never going to work. And they rang it through for 5,000 diamonds. And they got these diamonds, and I was like freaked out. Oh no, what do I do now? And I was pretty scared. And because really it was my dad's money at this point, and I didn't know I had a $5,000 limit. I probably would have spent more myself. But I was in trouble, and I was worried, and I was scared that I was going to get killed because these guys seemed like they meant business. So I was pretty low, and I didn't know what to do. They had taken all the stuff I owned in my backpack, and I was just there with these guys and I was scared. So that was my low point. And I kind of thought maybe I should call my dad, but I was a little nervous to do that. But the prodigal kind of had a low point too, and he finally came to himself. It says he comes to himself. Sometimes you hit a really low point before you're desperate enough to realize you need help, right? Or you need God. And so the prodigal gets to that point himself. And he decides, look, things are so bad now. I'm feeding these pigs. I'm so hungry and I don't want to eat what the pigs are eating because at least it's something to fill my stomach. And he says, you know, my dad's slaves got it better than this. Why am I doing it? I'm going to go back. I'm going to go talk to my dad. So for me, I finally had to come to that point in my story too. So I was, what happened is I went back with these $5,000 in diamonds, and so we could keep playing, and of course I lose. And they take everything, and they all leave, except for the guy who got me into the house. And I was like, that was bad again. And so they took me to some parking lot on a rooftop, and we were sitting there waiting, and this big limo pulls up, and this big, huge guy gets out with all his jewelry, and with all his guys, and I was like, I'm about to be killed. This is it. I'm going to be whacked. But he gets out, and they're talking in some other language. They're talking like crazy. Eventually, the big guy pulls out this big wad of money, pulls out all these bills, and gives it to a cab driver to drive me from Malaysia to Singapore, which is like an 8-hour cab ride. And they say, you need to meet us in Singapore tomorrow, and we're going to play again, and you can win back this money. I was freaked out. So I was worried my dad, I knew so little about money back then. I was worried that this $5,000 might break my dad, and he'll go bankrupt. I was so scared. And so I was planning on going to this card game. And so I get to Singapore. I'm pretty freaked out. I'm like, I should call my dad, but I don't want to. Maybe I should just go and win this money back, and then everything will be okay. But I finally called my dad. I was worried, though. I was worried he was going to be mad at me, and this would just be like the end of a relationship or something like that. I was pretty freaked out. I was very ashamed and scared. So different perspectives. The prodigal, when he finally calls his dad, or he goes home, and he says, look, I'd rather be your servant. I'm willing to be your servant. I want to. He thought he wasn't worthy to be a son anymore, if you notice what he says to him. Originally, he thought he was better off away from the father, right? Give me the stuff. I'm out of here. And then later, he comes back and he said, Dad, I'm not worthy to be your son. Just let me be one of your servants, right? He didn't. Ironically, he just didn't understand how much his dad loved him. He didn't know what he had with his dad in the first place, right? Jacob was pretty scared. He was sure his big brother Esau was going to hold a grudge against him. He fled because he heard Esau's out to get you. He's going to kill you, right? Which maybe at that point Esau would have done. But we're going to find out that when he finally meets up with his brother, he's totally dead wrong about his brother Esau. Do you know the story? You know what happens when they get together? It's really interesting. I was sure my dad would be furious at me. Not that he was an angry man, but I'd done a terrible thing. I was ashamed. I'd lost his money. I thought he would want me to go to the hotel and play this game to win the money back. That's how much I didn't understand my dad. I thought, oh, Dad's just going to say, okay, go, be careful, but go win that money back. That's how little I understood that father's love, right? So that's how naive I was. So when the son sets off in the prodigal story, he sets off, goes to his father, and then while he was still far off, his dad sees him. So here we start to see what the father was really like. So that this son thought, well, I'll go home, I'll beg for a position, and I'll say I'll be your servant. And but he didn't understand the father's perspective. So the father was actually watching for him, right? You get this idea that he was kind of always sitting there by the window looking on the horizon, looking for his son every day. Suddenly he spies him, and he is just over the moon that his son has come home, right? And he treats him like an honored son, not a slave, not a servant, which is what the son was hoping. He gives him a ring, a robe. He even throws a kicking party for him. Anyway. But so the prodigal didn't understand. From his perspective, he thought the most I could hope for was to be a slave. My father, when I called him, in case you didn't guess, he didn't care about the money. He wanted most of all for me to be safe, right? He says, don't go to that hotel. I still remember making the call and him saying, don't go to that hotel. And I was like, oh, good, because I was scared. I really didn't, and that's why I called. And he didn't get angry at me. I'm sure he was upset and who wants to lose all this money, but he's just like, don't go to the hotel, go to the police, and just be safe. So I didn't understand a father's love. So the father's perspective disagrees with the son's perspective. I had this view of what dad would be like or what he cared about more. In the story, the prodigal had a mixed up perspective as well. But then you get the perspective of the older brother. Remember, it's a story not just about the prodigal, right? It's about two sons. The story of two sons. So the older brother in the prodigal son story, he says, he's not too happy about it. He says, listen, remember, he's the good son. He never went away from home. He worked the family business. He was reliable. He was the good son, right? He says, so for all these years, I've been slaving free. I've been working like a slave. I never disobeyed your command. I've always been good. I never demanded free rent. Bob is the good brother in this story. But he says, you never even gave me a young goat so I could go celebrate with my friends. You didn't even give me a goat, let alone the fat calf. And he says, but this son of yours comes back. You love the bitterness there, right? He's not my brother, he's your son. Right? The son of yours comes back. And it says, he's devoured your property with prostitutes, and you give him the fatted calf. Well, the story doesn't actually say that the son went to prostitutes. The older brothers assume this. I don't know where he got this information. Or he just assumed, if I was going to do that, that's what I would do. I don't know, but it doesn't say that the prodigal did that. But so he's upset, right? He's like, I've been the good son all along, and you didn't even give me a goat. Where's my goat? Well, he was actually dead wrong. According to the older brother, then you have his father's a slave driver. He says, I've been slaving for you all these years. And his father's cheap. He says, I didn't even get my goat. And it's just not fair. You're not fair, Dad. So that's the older brother's perspective. In the story of Esau and Jacob, it blows you away. If you've never read the story before, I'm sorry to spoil it here. Because up to this point, you might be scared that Esau is going to be pretty mad at Jacob. Well, Esau was the good son, in a way, at that point, too. He actually did get shafted. Jacob, had the elaborate ruse, stole his birthright. And I always feel bad for Esau when you read it. And Esau says to his father, come on, Dad, can't you bless me too? Have you only one blessing? Bless me also. And he starts crying. This is the big burly hunter guy, the hairy guy. And he's weeping with his dad. I feel bad for Esau in that story. So you'd think he was the one who got shafted. He was the good brother. So Jacob finally comes back way later. And they're going to meet, and Jacob's freaked out if you read the story. He's like, send gifts ahead of him to Esau, go and do this. And when he comes, he bows to Esau and all this kind of stuff. He tells him, I'm your servant, you're my master, all this kind of stuff. Jacob is really freaked out because he's sure Esau is going to kill him. And Esau shows up with like 500 men. Oh man, I'm in trouble, right? He's just showing up with his family and all this stuff and all his herds, and he's like, he brought an army with him. I am in big trouble. But what does Esau do? It says Esau runs to him, embraces him, falls on his neck, kisses him, and weeps. This is how Esau receives him back. Blows you away. If there's ever a good moment for Esau, because if you read in other Bible stories, Esau is often looked down on. But here, man, what a gracious guy. Not only that, you compare it with the story in the prodigal son. It uses the same language. When the father sees the prodigal coming, what's he do? He has compassion. He runs to him, falls on his neck, and kisses him. I think that Jesus uses the exact same description in order to kind of show that even Esau was more gracious than you guys. If the older brother in that story is meant to kind of be the more righteous, the Pharisees, or these people who kind of look down on prodigals. So look, even Esau, who we all know is not this greatest God, he even did this. So it kind of makes it look even worse. And the father's reaction. As a father, I guess I kind of think that I would take my son back. I love my son so much, right? Hopefully it never happens. Hopefully he doesn't get involved in a blackjack game. But anyway, I would take him back. And I love him. But from an Old Testament perspective, from the ancient Near Eastern times, or even in the biblical law, Deuteronomy says in Deuteronomy 21, a rebellious son, you can stone him. Hey, that's a legitimate response to a rebellious son. So it wouldn't be just taken for granted that, of course, he'll receive him back. This would have been against expectations, right? Or back in the ancient Near Eastern times, if son was so treated you this way, you could just beat the crap out of him and make him your slave or something like this, okay? So the father's reaction would have been like, wow, this guy, he really loved his son, and he was so gracious in taking him back. So what is the truth? What's the true perspective? We had the son's perspective. Well, the father says to his son when he comes back, he says, son, you're always, this is to the older brother. He says, son, you've always been with me. All that I have is yours. So remember, the older brother thought, I've been your slave. You've been cheap with me, and this isn't fair. And the father now says to the older brother, he says, hey, everything I have is yours. Back in ancient Israelite custom, the younger son would get a third, and then the older son would get a double portion. The firstborn gets a double portion. So the last 2/3 are the older brother. So pretty much everything the father has is yours. And I assume that includes fatted calves, right? Goats, whatever his palate desires. So the father is saying, actually, everything I have is yours, and you're always with me, and I do value you. Come join the party. So at this point, there's this party pumping in the background, and the older brother just won't join, right? He's like, no, this isn't fair. This is ridiculous. So he won't come and celebrate. He's like, forget it. And the father is saying, hey, no, come on. Everything I have is yours. You've got this all wrong. Your perspective is actually skewed. This is the truth. And remember in the story that the father is God, right? He's kind of God in that parable. This is God's perspective. So the truth, the older brother has not been a slave, even though he kind of thought he was. The father hasn't been cheap with them. Grace and generosity just aren't fair. So it's not that he doesn't love the older brother, but he's being gracious and generous to this prodigal's return. And that's not fair. And he thinks his father shows bias to his younger son. He thinks he's been screwed over. And he's mad. He won't join the party. Well, then it comes down to our perspective. What's our perspective? So I've kind of been talking about different perspectives in the story. You have the sons, the father. How about us? How do we fit into this? Your story. It all depends about what you've done. With me in this story about the backpacking and getting into trouble with the cards and losing all this money, I was actually pretty ashamed of it for years. I didn't like to talk about it. I was afraid people would judge me about it. And for years, I just didn't even tell anyone the story. I didn't want to talk about it. I was so ashamed. It's amazing how you can kind of carry this kind of stuff around, right? And it even comes back when I think about the events now. I can feel kind of some of that. Sometimes we can cling to shame and guilt in our life. And even though it causes us agony and pain to hold on to it, but we don't want to let it go, right? We can hold on to guilt. Our perspective can be like the prodigal who didn't want to go home because he was ashamed. He was scared of what his dad would say. He thought he wasn't good enough. When he shows up, he's like, I'll just be a servant. Can I be a servant in your household? So he thought he wasn't good enough. Maybe that's your perspective. Maybe I don't know any of you guys, but I know we sometimes hold on to shame. We think we're not good enough, and we think that we're good enough to come home to God. But this parable to you then says, come. God is gracious. It's not about fairness. It's about God's mercy, His grace. The Father is waiting. He forgives and accepts us. And that's the great good news of the story, right? The good news for the prodigal. But for other people, maybe our perspective can be pride that, hey, we deserve better. Maybe it's more like the older brother. Maybe we have a skewed idea of God, and you can get kind of bitter, you know? I've been faithful all these years. I work faithfully for the church or for whatever. Where's my goat? I want my goat. What's going on? So whatever our version of events, the story, the true perspective is the father's perspective, right? He takes the son home, who is the prodigal, and to the older brother who thinks he's been kind of ripped off, he says, look, everything I have is yours. You're always with me. The gospel is good news for everybody, depending on our perspective. The good news, we can live without shame and guilt. We're accepted, we're blessed. But you know, we need to trust God with that reality. We need to go join the party. You know, the older brother wouldn't go join the party. The party's pumping in the background and he's standing on the side. I'm not going in. Well, we have to realize God's perspective is the true perspective. Whether it's shame or guilt keeping us out, we need to let it go and realize God is a gracious God and He forgives, and that His grace is there for us. If we're bitter because we think God owes us something, we need to realize God has given you everything. God has a gracious perspective. At the beginning, I said, does that really sound like God, that He would just kind of give in to the demands of the prodigal? Well, depending on what you think about that, it might depend on which perspective of the son you hold. But when we realize how much God has given us, how gracious He's given us, we might feel more like a prodigal. But sometimes we can kind of start to think God owes us, or something like that. So what we believe matters. Our perspective, our theology, how we understand God really matters for our life. Are we going to go join the party? Are we going to give in to God and just trust in Him? We need to trust Him. We can trust God's perspective, or you can cling to your own perspective. That you're not good enough, that I need to earn this more. The prodigal didn't think he deserved to be a son. The older brother thinks he deserved to be a son because he's been slaving like crazy. Right? Well, the gospel says that God saved us, not by works of righteousness we've done, but according to His mercy. Right? That's the gospel. Interestingly, the parable ends. What does the older brother do? It doesn't tell us, right? It kind of ends up, the father's like, look, everything I have is yours. What's the older brother do? Oh, it's over. It's like one of those movies that ends, what was happening? Was the top going to keep spinning or not? You got to get aside here. I think in a way it kind of leaves it up to us, right? The son doesn't decide. What are you going to do? It leaves it in our hands. Great story. But we have to, the final response to the elder brother is never stated. It's open for us to respond to God. How are we going to respond? Who will we trust? Right? That's a question of trust. Who will we trust in Him? I'm going to pray. God, thanks for your amazing grace, your mercy, and that through your work on the cross, nothing to do with our own righteousness, that you have saved us, God. I pray that we could live in that we could remember your grace, that we could give up our shame and accept your forgiveness, and realize that you've done everything for us, and that we can trust you with that. And I pray you help all of us to live in that grace. In Jesus' name.